Hi, I'm Kevin America. Welcome to our class. Today we're going to have a lesson on phrasal verbs. So this is going to be very interesting. Phrasal verbs can be pretty difficult, and they confuse a lot of English language learners, okay? Now, learning phrasal verbs can be pretty complex. So in this lesson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin at a beginner level. We're going to start easy. So ideas we can understand, examples that we all know. So we can learn what a phrasal verb is, how to make it, and how to hear a phrasal verb, okay? But as the lesson goes forward, we're going to get a little more difficult and a little more difficult. And by the end of this phrasal verb lesson, we're going to be pretty advanced English learning, okay? So we'll start easy, and then we'll get a little more advanced. You stop whenever you want, okay? All right, so let's start with the idea that phrasal verbs are actually idioms. Can you believe it? A phrasal verb is an idiom. Okay. An idiom is a phrase that means something different than it says, right? A phrase that means one thing, but it says something else. So let's look at this one. It is raining cats and dogs. Have you ever heard this idiom before? If someone comes inside from the outside and says, "Oh my gosh, it's raining cats and dogs out there," what he's saying is that cats and dogs are falling from the sky. But there's probably no cats or no dogs. So what he says is cats and dogs. But what he means is simply that it's raining very hard. So we say, "Oh, it's raining cats and dogs," just to mean that it's raining very hard. That is an idiom, you see. Now we have to remember that a phrasal verb is an idiom. It means something different than it says. You see? All right. So let's get into it. Let's talk about our first idiom. So how do we make a phrasal verb? Well, to make a phrasal verb, we have to use a phrase. Not just a verb, but more than one word. And that's going to be a verb plus a preposition. Okay? We have to use a verb plus a preposition. And remember that it's going to mean something different than it says. Let's look at this one, to bring up. Now, the first thing we have to know is the verb to bring. What does it mean? To bring something means you have it with you when you go somewhere, right? I always bring my keys wherever I go. You see, we bring things. I bring things to my friend's house to say hello. You see? And what does up mean? Well, up is pretty obvious. It's the direction away from the ground. Up, right? So if I have some stairs and I want to bring my computer up the stairs, I bring it up the stairs, right? I will bring up my computer. That's not a phrasal verb. That is not a phrasal verb. That's simply the verb to bring. I can bring it across, right? I can bring it down. I can bring it to you or bring it in from outside. However, if you use the phrasal verb to bring up, it means to mention a topic. So let's read the example sentence. When I call my friend, she always brings up the weather. The weather is the topic. And so when we say that someone brings up something, it means they mention it. I call my friend, I just want to know how she's doing. How are you? Wonderful, good. But every time she brings up the weather, well, it's so cloudy today. I want it to be sunny. You see? That means to mention a topic. So let's take a moment to explore this. Now, when you mention a topic, when you bring up the weather, what are you bringing? What do you have with you that you take? Nothing. It has nothing to do with the word bring. To bring up doesn't mean to bring at all. And what about the direction up? Nope. It doesn't mean anything to do with up, and it doesn't mean anything to do with to bring. However, when you put it together as a phrasal verb, when you put it together as a phrasal verb, to bring up, means to mention a topic. Okay, let's do a few more phrasal verbs so that we can really understand how to use this. Okay? All right, so we've got a couple of phrasal verbs here. Let's look. The first one is to call off. Now, when you call something off, it means to cancel. You say, we're not doing it. I'm sorry. We had a plan. We had scheduled it. We were going to do it, but now we are not going to do it. So she called off the meeting. Just means she canceled the meeting, right? How about to hold up? To hold up means to delay something. Something is going to happen, but wait, just hold on. Hold up while we do something. Hold on is a different one. So to hold up is to delay. So the weather held up the bus, so we were late. Okay. All right. Now we're going to explore a new idea. Remember, a phrasal verb needs more than one word. If it's just a verb, then that's it. But we need a verb plus a preposition. However, there are some phrasal verbs we call three-word phrasal verbs. What do you think that means? That's right, phrasal verbs that need three words to make its meaning. Wow. So let's look at this first one. It's pretty interesting. What about the verb to break? What does it mean to break something? If I break this pen, then will have broken it. It doesn't work anymore. Maybe it's in more than one piece. That's the verb to break. How about break in? So to break in means to go to a house or a business as a burglar, break a glass to get in and maybe steal some things, right? That's the verb to break in. It's a crime. However, let's put an on the end of it. So we break in on. What does it mean to break in on something? Well, it means to interrupt, which is interesting. Something that's happening between two people, you can break in on that and say, "Excuse me, gentlemen." So let's read an example. The waiter broke in on our conversation, which is to say, I was talking with my friend. "Hi, how are you?" "Hey, I'm fantastic. Thanks for asking." "Boy, it's lovely weather." And the waiter went, "Excuse me." And so we had to stop our conversation. He interrupted us, or he broke in on us, or rather broke in on our conversation. Let's look at this next one. What about to come up with? What does it mean to come up with something? It means to create something new, right? Let's look at the example. We need to come up with new ideas, right? So to create new ideas is to come up with new ideas. You're thinking of new things. Those are three-word phrasal verbs, okay? Okay, so let's talk about something a little more complex. Here we're going to get into grammar of the phrasal verb, okay? Now, we're going to explore something that's called a separable phrasal verb. Remember, phrasal verbs come in more than one word to make one verb, okay? But let's talk about this. This is what we call the object of the sentence. Let's look at this. I throw something. That's a verb. I throw. But what do I throw? I throw the ball, right? So the verb leads to a noun. I have to throw something. And the object that's receiving the action is the object of the sentence, okay? So something that's being done. Okay, I throw the ball. Now let's look at the way a phrasal verb can treat the object. Okay, so let's look at this phrasal verb that we've looked at before, to call off something, right? We called off the meeting. We were going to have a meeting. We decided no more, never mind. We will not have the meeting. We called it off. However, what did we call off? Just like I throw the ball, what did we call off? We called off the meeting. So let's look at this. We called the meeting off. So what we can do with many phrasal verbs, okay, many separable phrasal verbs, is you take the phrasal verb and you separate it and you put the object right in the middle, right? So we called the meeting off. Now, this is one of the reasons that phrasal verbs can be so difficult, really difficult, because you have to hear, when you're watching a movie or a television show or listening to a podcast, you have to hear called the meeting off, and you have to know that when you hear off, oh, that's part of called, right? So we didn't call the meeting. You're going to hear, oh, I called the meeting off. Oh, wait, that off means that called means something different. So we just have to know that this is our phrasal verb. And we have the object in the middle. That can be a little confusing, okay? That's one of the reasons that phrasal verbs can be kind of difficult to learn. And that's why we're doing these lessons. Now, let's turn it up a bit. Let's make it a little more difficult and see if you can keep up. All right, so let's look at this one. This one is pretty crazy. Let me separate it here so we know what we're looking at. Let's read this sentence together. We called the very interesting but somewhat long meeting off. That's a real phrase. That's a real sentence. You will hear this in English quite often. Let's do it again. What did we do? We called off. What did we call off? We called off the meeting, right? Or we called the meeting off. However, in between the two parts of this phrasal verb, we can separate the phrasal verb and put stuff in the middle. We can use a very long phrase, usually a descriptive one, in the middle of this phrasal verb. So, you simply have to know that this is the verb. And here is the interesting part. A native English speaker has no problems with this at all. That's easy for us because our brains are ready. Our ear is listening for this preposition at the end. And as soon as we have the preposition at the end, it's very easy for us to go back and change the meaning of something. I called, what did you call? Oh, I called the very interesting but somewhat long meeting off. Oh, called off, no problem. Now, for an English language learner, this can be pretty tricky. Once again, this is why we're having these lessons, okay? Because you call off the very interesting but somewhat long meeting, or commonly, you can call the very interesting but somewhat long meeting off. That's no problem at all, and that's what it will sound like. That's a little crazy, right? Okay, good. Let's do something else. Let's get away from separable, and then let's talk about some inseparable phrasal verbs. Okay, so these phrasal verbs are going to be inseparable. And remember, in means not. So before, we could separate our phrasal verbs and put things in the middle. But these particular phrasal verbs are inseparable. You can't pull them apart. So let's look. One of them is to run into something or someone. And it means to meet someone accidentally, right? You didn't plan to meet them, but hey, there you are. It's interesting running into you. I ran into my friend at the market. I didn't plan to see him, but hey, I ran into him. So let's try this other one. How about to go over? What does it mean to go over something? It means to review it, right? You did it before and you want to just go over it one more time. So they like to go over their homework before school. You see, it means to review their homework, to make sure they got it right. Okay? Now, the thing to remember is that these are inseparable phrasal verbs, which means you can go over your homework. However, you cannot go your homework over. That doesn't make sense. That is not a correct thing. And if you try to use that with a native English speaker, people will be very confused. You can run into your friend, but you can't run your friend into. You can't do that, you see? Some phrasal verbs you can separate, some phrasal verbs you cannot separate. All right, now I'd like to introduce one more rule for phrasal verbs, and it's a little strange. However, it's very important, okay? And this is the rule. You cannot use a pronoun after a separable phrasal verb. Okay, hold on. Let's take a moment and remember. What is a pronoun? Do you guys remember? Pronouns are those little words that mean everything. He, she, it, I, you, we, they. So if I have a book, I can say the book. Or I can say it. It is very heavy. The book is very heavy. Good, excellent. So we'll remember that separable phrasal verbs, you can pull them apart and put the meeting in the middle. Call the meeting off. And you just have to know that call off is the phrasal verb. Let's look at one here. What if we pick it up? Remember, the meeting is it. the book is it. He picks up the book, or he picks the book up. Both, no problem. You can put it at the end, you can put it in the middle, easy. However, if the book becomes a pronoun, it, then you can say he picks it up. It can go in the middle, no problem. That's great, that's where it goes. However, you cannot say he picks up it. He picks up her. He picks up me. No, he picks me up, sure. He picks it up, sure. He picks us up, no problem. But picks up it? No, cannot do it. If you use a pronoun, he, she, it, I, you, we, they, it must be in the middle of a separable phrasal verb. Crazy, right? Okay. However, remember, inseparable phrasal verbs, you can't put them in the middle, so you must put them at the end. So you can use a pronoun at the end of an inseparable phrasal verb. Let's look at some examples. All right. So here we have some examples, okay? First, let's talk about the separable phrasal verbs. We can pull them apart and put things in the middle. He held the bus up. Here we see the object right in the middle. No problem. He held the bus up. Also, we could say he held up the bus, and therefore your phrasal verb is all together. No problem. Both are okay. He held up the bus. He held the bus up. Sure, no problem. However, when the bus becomes it must be in the middle. He held it up. Cannot say he held up it. Just can't. Sorry. No way. But if you look at the inseparable phrasal verbs, yes, you can put it, him, her, us at the end. No problem. So we say he ran into a friend. But if we use a pronoun for friend, it would be him. So he ran into him. No problem. I know it's a little confusing. Sometimes you can use a pronoun at the end. Sometimes you cannot. But that's phrasal verbs. They can be a little confusing, and that's why we're having these lessons. All right, so let's review. This was a pretty complex lesson, and I started in a pretty beginner level so everyone can understand. And as the lesson progressed, we got a little more advanced and a little more advanced until it turned into a real grammar lesson, right? So let's review. What did we learn today? Remember, phrasal verbs are idioms, so they mean something different than they say. To bring something up is different than to bring up the weather. Okay, we make a phrasal verb by using a verb and a preposition, and we do have 3-word phrasal verbs, which are usually verb, preposition, preposition. Okay. Also, we have separable and inseparable phrasal verbs. Some phrasal verbs you can separate and put the object in the middle. Some verbs you cannot separate. And of course, remember, if you use a separable phrasal verb, you can use a pronoun, but it must be in the middle. You can't use a pronoun after a separable phrasal verb. Whew! All right. Well, I'm Kevin America. Thanks for having a great lesson with me.